Hey everyone, what's up? What's going on? My name's Joe, and this, of course, is just the pre-roll to our podcast. We're going to get right into our review of First Man, but first, have you heard about our new web series, Goldfingers, that streams exclusively on our YouTube channel? Yeah, that's right. Goldfingers is a brand new addition to the How Many Fingers brand, and the second episode was literally just released, like a day or two ago. Goldfingers, for those of you who are just hearing about it for the first time right now, is a data-driven Oscar prediction video series created by our very own co-host, Mike King. So if you want to look smart this Oscar season in front of your friends or family, or most importantly, the internet, what's more important than that? Tune into Goldfingers and accurately predict the winners and nominees of the upcoming Academy Awards, aka the Oscars. Again, that's exclusively on our YouTube channel, and you can find our YouTube channel by searching How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up? The podcast. And once you're there, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of Goldfingers or How Many Fingers. Speaking of, let's get right into our review. We're going to be reviewing First Man this week. Enjoy.
Hi, I'm Mike.
And I'm Joe.
And you're listening to How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up? The podcast. And this week, we're reviewing First Man, the Neil Armstrong biopic.
You know, one of the best athletes of our time. You know, before the whole doping scandal thing.
Wrong Armstrong.
Oh.
Welcome to How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up? Featuring two guys getting litty titty and reviewing movies in a weekly podcast form.
Thank you, Luke Malvey, who left that for us on Facebook.
Luke Malvey, that's an OG podcast listener, also an OG neighbor from my Ridgewood Avenue days back in
Deep cut
in my life.
Oh
boy. But
so
this week,
what are we drinking, Mike?
we're gonna drink some pineapple juice and Tito's vodka.
What kind of concoction is going to make a fool of me?
So I've been trying to get away from beer a little bit, just because the gut is getting a little hefty, and I don't really drink too much during the week anyway, so it just takes up space in the fridge. So I'm like, all right, let me buy a handle of Tito's. I can make whatever I want with this, and then I ran out of my dirty martini mixer that I was mixing it with. So I was looking up what are some good mixers for vodka, because I didn't really want cranberry vodka or something. And I went out on this website and it said pineapple juice, and I was like, oh, I've got pineapple juice that I've been using for recipes and stuff. And I tried it and it's not bad. It kind of tastes like a screwdriver, a little more tropical. It reminds me of, because I think pineapple juice doesn't really cut through or cover the taste of the vodka as well as orange juice does. It ends up tasting, back in our college days, regretfully, we used to do Everclear and orange juice, which Everclear is a grain alcohol that's 100 proof or 190 proof or something like that. It's mostly, percentage-wise, it's mostly alcohol.
We also thought that was good for us when we were sick. We were I remember one of our friends was yeah. And it was anytime I feel sick, it's just I drink 2 Everclear and OJs and get a salad from
Salad Works.
Wait, what was that? What was the hoagie place we had?
Hoagie place.
Hoagie sub. Quiznos.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What was I gonna say? Yeah. What's it called? One of my most popular searches, just from the time I started drinking to still to this day, is what are cocktails you can make with alcohol? It's just I feel I drink I prefer beer so much, and I don't have a lot of hard alcohol. So when I do, I'm like, how do I consume this? What's a way that people drink alcohol? It's just kind of like I can count on my hands how many mixed drinks I've had in like a bar.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I don't order them in bars too often.
But they make it. They can like make a drink though. I should.
Every time I've gotten like converted to a cocktail, it's been like, oh, I took a chance on one at a bar. Like the first time I had a dirty martini, I was like, oh, I want to drink this for the rest of my life.
Right.
First time I had, well, that's not true. The first time I had a old fashioned when we were in our Mad Men phase, I ordered it at like a club type bar where like like a Stephanie's type place where they're trying to get drinks out as fast as possible.
Right.
So it obviously did not come out the way it should taste.
What kind of look did that guy give you?
He's like, you better be a fucking good tipper.
Right, yeah.
But then I had it at like a real nice hotel one time, and it was like, oh, those are good.
Yeah,
this is
good.
It's like a tropical screwdriver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. You've converted me to a Tito's boy.
What were you before?
Just whatever.
Whatever was cheapest.
Yeah.
That's like really, like I don't even for like for whiskey have like a brand really.
Yeah.
But for vodka, just I've had Tito's so much. Something about it. I feel like it mixes well, but also cuts through well. So and it's not like it doesn't taste like rubbing alcohol vodka to me.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Right. Remember in college when we used to use a Brita filter to filter cheap vodka into like maybe tasting like better vodka?
I forgot.
I don't really. It was just experimental stuff.
I think we had even like Googled like how many times is like vodka distilled, like the best types of vodka,
right?
And we would keep putting it through the Brita filter that amount of time, as being like, we're distilling it,
right? Yeah, it looked like we were in a fucking like meth lab in our like college suite like
probably
bathroom,
shaking these cans, sediments at the bottom.
But yeah, these are good. Good choice.
Good way to start off the night. This is our first episode. I think we were recording out of order this evening.
We'll hit the... Yeah, so this is the last one.
The last one we're recording.
This batch, right? Yeah.
So yeah, we're recording First Man. First Man. We were requested to say the name to the tune of God's Plan. Thanks, Ross Wiseman. So yeah, let me read the IMDb description. Then Joe's got some notes that are gonna take us out of this world.
I sure hope so.
First Man is a look at the life of the astronaut Neil Armstrong and the legendary space mission that led him to become the first man to walk on the moon on July 20th, 1969.
Ooh. So, First Man was directed by Damien Chazelle. Damien Chazelle has directed Whiplash and La La Land, both of which he wrote. His writing credits also include The Last Exorcism, Part 2, and 10 Cloverfield Lane, which I didn't know.
No.
Maybe, yeah. First Man, however, is not written by Damien Chazelle. It's written by Josh Singer, whose writing credits include The Fifth Estate, Spotlight, and The Post. First Man is based on a book titled First Man, The Life of Neil A. Armstrong. Can't forget that middle initial.
We got to separate it from all the other Neil Armstrong.
And that was written by James R. Hansen. This film stars Ryan Gosling as Neil Armstrong alongside Claire Foy, Jason Clarke, Kyle Chandler. Is it Chandler?
I think so. What did you think it was?
I don't know what I thought it was. I knew it began with a Chan. I didn't realize it was just Chandler. Like from
it's Joey's brother.
Right? What?
Right? It's Joey Chandler, right? No, Chandler's just the character.
Yeah, Chandler's just the character.
First episode. Let's go.
Yeah, I know. I need more alcohol.
It's like the first episode is you're rusty. Your brain's not making the right connections.
Right, yeah.
And then the third episode, you've had so much alcohol that it's prevented from making those connections.
Yeah. I was like just on like Joe's podcast this week, and like you can still hear it, but I'm like getting over something. I was even supposed to start taking I went to the doctor, and the doctor was like you kind of look like you're like kind of through it already. They're like, I'll write a prescription, but you can't like take it to the pharmacy until Friday or something. He even wrote a note on it. And then yesterday I was like, I am feeling better. And then
So you didn't do
also,
it.
I didn't want to like drink on antibiotics either. So I don't know. I don't know where that came from. But yeah,
this is clear alcohol, so this is gonna you're gonna
right.
be cured.
Yes, I need 2 more of these and a Quiznos salad, and I'll be good to go. Corey Stoll, Ciarán Hinds, Christopher Abbott, Patrick Fugget.
Fugget. Stamen Patrick.
And Lucas Haas.
And Pablo Schreiber. Iggy, or what's his name from
Oh, yes.
The Wire?
I don't know, but he wasn't in
Pablo
the Wikipedia
Schreiber
list of cast. Yeah, just some interesting notes.
Pablo Schreiber, yeah.
Right.
I wasn't crazy.
Chazelle and cinematographer Linus Sandgren chose to shoot the film on 3 different formats: 16mm, 35mm, and IMAX 70mm film. That was just for like the moon sequence. The 16mm format was used in most of the scenes that occur inside the spacecraft, with the 35mm film being used for a lot of the scenes at the Armstrong household and the NASA facility. I was reading and listening to some reviews, and I kind of wish I saw this in IMAX. Did you happen to catch this in IMAX?
No.
I feel like
After getting out of it, I was like, ooh, I probably should have. I don't think it was in IMAX anymore around me by the time I went to see it. This came out a while ago.
We are kind of late to the game here, right? And 3 weeks from now, it's going to be even later to the game.
It's a potential Oscar contender, so we were like, well, this is going to have play for a little bit.
Right.
Even though people aren't really seeing it, I think it'll get nominated for enough that people are going to go back and see it when it's released.
Maybe this will probably make a appearance back in the theaters.
Yeah, it'll be nominated at the Golden Globes at least for sure, since they have the drama split. But
It seems like one of those ones, or it seems like if you're going to see like an Oscar movie this year in IMAX, you would see this one. Mm-hmm. It's obviously, like I just said, it's not entirely on IMAX cameras, but when they get to the moon, spoiler alert for American history, it looks like it makes great use of the IMAX scene. Like literally when they like land on the moon, apparently like it just fucking, like when they do like the landscape of the moon, it just like it opens up to IMAX, and that's gotta be fucking cool. Yeah. Then I have some other notes. Before we get into this, I'm starting to notice like this kind of like cinematography trend in like potential Oscar nominees films, and we've really barely scraped the surface of Oscar season yet on this podcast. I know I just made like that joke with our last episode, or 3 episodes ago, if you're listening to this, with A Star Is Born, where I was kind of like, The Shallow is more like Shallow Depth of Field, or whatever the fuck I said. But there's a lot of close-ups in this movie too. I've been saying this about like a few movies this year, and maybe even last year.
I think I have a defense for that in this movie.
Okay.
Listening to the Director's Cut podcast, where Damien Chazelle was interviewed by Darren Aronofsky, who is a surprisingly boring interviewer. He's just kind of like, hey, here's this question I had prepared. It was just not organic at all. There's been way better episodes of that podcast, and Damien Chazelle himself, as much as I really respect his work, is a pretty boring dude.
Right, yeah.
Especially for how young he is too. But he was talking about how they didn't really shoot a lot of stuff on stages, in terms of like, it wasn't like, oh, let's like shoot in the capsule and let's like tear like half of it off. They tried to shoot everything as realistic as possible, so they would try to fit the camera in very small spaces. So that's why a lot of the stuff is close up and shallow depth of field, and so that they can put like this camera with a wide field of view inside the actual like replica capsule, or when they're in the Armstrong house, like there's no cutaway walls or anything. They're just following the Armstrongs around. So he was trying to make everything feel like it would actually feel if you were in the capsule or in the household or whatever like that.
Right.
So I think that's why, because of the scenarios where these capsules and stuff are really tight quarters, the camera ends up just naturally being in the person's face.
That's interesting.
For a close-up.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily like, oh, let's get like this guy's reaction.
Oh, no, most definitely. But I was just... I didn't realize... I kind of didn't put two and two together that, like, this might, is this something? Is this a trend? I don't know. It's just me who's seeing movies once a week, kind of. But then I did read this article in Vulture by Chris Lee titled... Extreme close-ups are defining the current movie moment, and it's definitely worth a read. And there's a lot that it goes over, but the TLDR of it is that directors and actors are becoming a lot more confident with like shots where, like, especially in this, where like somebody's face is taking up like 90% of the screen, because with more recent post-production technology, they're able to kind of like, we've talked about this too before, but like it's the equivalent of like the attractive like Snapchat filter. They're able to kind of pick and choose, like, like if you were just to like with raw footage like go like very close to somebody's face, you'd be like, oh wow, this is
humans are disgusting to look at.
Right, yeah, this is very distracting. It's like Lady Gaga was not born without pores, like there was somebody who softened the fuck out of that image,
Yeah.
So I think that's like part of it, and then I think that he goes over a few more points, but I just thought that was interesting. And I read that article like very recently, like after I saw this movie, and it started to make me think, like, I feel like there's certain, this is totally just on a whim, but and no factual knowledge, no articles or think pieces that back this up. This is just me, but I feel like there's certain shots in this movie where Ryan Gosling's face doesn't look like Ryan Gosling's face.
No, yeah. When they're in the capsule, there were times where we would be like on a close-up that's kind of like underneath him because that's the only spot they could fit the fucking camera.
Right.
And I'd be like, is that Christopher, like, especially during like the Gemini Agena docking sequence where I was like, is that Christopher Abbott or is that Ryan Gosling?
Right, yeah. And
you had to sort of judge based on the expression that the character was making. Like,
and I kind of, I don't know, I was kind of, they would, yeah, again, it was like shooting on different angles, and then like maybe there was some form of makeup, like minimal makeup that they were doing on him, but it was like, are they trying to make him look more like Neil Armstrong than just like a Ryan Gosling kind of? I don't know. That was just, I, again, have no idea. But
yeah, I mean, it was a little confusing, but I mean, I found that if you like paid attention long enough, it sort of made sense to you, just in relation to like, especially the longer that scene goes on, like in relation to where they are in the cockpit, you sort of start to be like, okay, well, the window's to his right, so that's Ryan Gosling, and and whatnot. So I don't think it actually hurt the film in any way.
Oh, it didn't. I was definitely just curious. Where I was just kind of like,
it took me out of it for a little bit, where I was like, okay, that. Who is this that I'm looking at? Right. Because they're not talking during that sequence at all. They're just like nervously looking around during the docking sequence.
Because like also I wouldn't like blame them for doing something like that, because like I also kind of came out of this way wishing maybe they even leaned a little more towards that. It would have made a less natural kind of, especially if Damien Chazelle's not even like, he's like, we're just gonna film in like a regular old house or a regular old space capsule. It's just kind of like, I love Ryan Gosling, but like I also understood like a few years back where he's like, I'm gonna take a few years off because people are gonna get fucking sick of seeing my face. Kind of, it's kind of that thing where like he's one of my favorite actors working right now, but it's just kind of like, it takes me out of First Man sometimes, where I'm just like, that's Ryan Gosling, kind of like,
look at that hot bod.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, it's just like when he's like with the daughter at first, I was just kind of like,
Neil Armstrong can get it.
I was just kind of like, this looks like Blue Valentine, like where he's like fucking around with the kids, or like then like later it's just kind of like, if things get slightly sci-fi, I'm like, oh, it's Blade Runner, like, it's just like things.
Yeah, well, I mean,
you become too attached to certain things.
Damien did talk about like intentionally, because they were watching so much like stock footage from NASA and just of like the time period, they ended up sort of utilizing that to build the structure of the style of the movie. So a lot of it ended up having this like faux documentary feel to it. which I think is why it feels similar to Blue Valentine, because Blue Valentine does have that kind of
definitely.
like cinema verite feel to it, where it's just a camera following people around in this, relationship and then breakup and whatnot.
Where I'm sure Blue Valentine was just like, let's just shoot in this house. You know, they live in this house, they're shooting in this house.
Which, like, I do like that in this. Like, I actually really enjoy the cinematography in this for the most part.
Anything
Linus
that has to do with the family.
He's a Swedish cinematographer. He did American Hustle, Joy, La La Land, and Battle of the Sexes. And like, as much as we had a lot to say about La La Land, I really can't hate the cinematography.
Oh, not at all.
Besides the first opening sequence, just looking. But I mean, I guess they were trying to capture LA and whatnot. But I thought it really kept you in the shoes of the astronauts when they're in the capsule, like especially when they would have those shots that were just on their face, but they would let the camera shake as it's like going through like takeoff and whatnot. So you would feel everything. Like, that made me want to watch it in IMAX. Where I was like, oh, like, even like if I'm not looking out the window, I think that like shake would really be like, oh my god, like with like the IMAX speakers like rumbling and whatnot. It makes you feel like kind of claustrophobic because of how close it is. Like it's like almost like a weird extra dimension to the cinematography where like rather than shooting from the astronaut's perspective and the wall is like right in front of you, if you put the camera like right up close to them, you end up getting a sense of where the wall is without even looking at it in the whatnot. But then when they're in the house, I really like the cinematography too, because then they can really lean into that sort of cinema verite style. Like, I really like the one scene during like the Agena docking sequence when they have like the speaker that's connected to like the NASA frequency or whatever at their home, and like the one kid like steals it, and like we have this nice shot where like he's holding on to it and he's like laughing, and Janet Armstrong, Claire Foy, is like, give it back, and it just keeps going. But it's like this nice shot where like we can't really fully see everything. It's just kind of like, again, like someone just documenting what's going on in the Armstrongs' home. It's
also very Tree of Life-esque, kind of. Yeah.
But then there's some shots that are very constructed and stable and not handheld, and those kind of took me out of it. As much as they're nice shots.
Like what shots?
The one that really sticks out to me is when, after like the White House, when they find out that another group of astronauts died.
I'm not crazy about that scene either.
Well, when they're in the hotel room, and there's just that one dolly zoom shot on Ryan Gosling, like sort of like stewing in his own brain. It's like really nicely lit, but it's not really for this film. Like, it starts to feel constructed, and it just feels like it's from a different film. Like the other areas of like lighting and like camera movement feel very natural, more like muted colors, looking like they're something that was shot on like a 16 millimeter in 1969 or whatever. But that shot is like neons, like reds and blues and stuff from like spots that don't even seem natural in the hotel room. Like, I think he just created a cool shot without thinking of like, does this fit into the grand scope of this movie? So that like kind of took me out of it. But for the most part, I mean, I really enjoyed the cinematography. I thought it was very beautiful at times, and I thought they found places where it fit into that cinema verite style while still being able to do some cool creative lighting stuff. I also really enjoyed the soundtrack to this movie. I think it might be my favorite soundtrack of the year so far. It's Justin Hurwitz who helped compose the score for La La Land. But like they really like they use the theremin, which like if you're not familiar as a listener, it's like the electronic instrument. It's got like a metal rod, and using like the frequency of how close your hand is to the instrument, you can control the pitch of it. So it like if you ever hear like a haunted house score or like an alien score that like ooh, that's a theremin making that noise, and they use it like to make some like really beautiful noises here, but it also makes everything sound otherworldly at times, which is great for a space movie. And then they use the harp a lot, which I think is great. And I don't like it. Like, I think anyone else composing the score would have gone like big band, big orchestra, like gone like a John Williams direction the entire time.
They do have like a 90-piece orchestra or something too.
They do. But like when they use it appropriately so that like it's pretty stripped down for the most part, and then you get to like the moon landing and it's like big and blaring and intense. But like they just have a lot of like nice themes that keep coming back throughout, with like the harp playing this kind of like almost like speed picking part on the harp that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I do like that because like the theremin and the what's it called? I know they use like the Moog or synthesizer. Like these are like all. Like, I'm also glad it didn't go in the direction of some sort of like sci-fi electronic kind of thing. And like these are all things that we had access to when the moon, there was the moon landing. It's
like there's parts of it that like I could have been like, oh man, like Radiohead composed this. But then there's parts of it that just feel like a traditional movie score in the best way. You know, like exciting and classic and cinematic. So I thought it was just a nice mix throughout, and it definitely has like Justin Hurwitz's taste to it. Like there's parts of it that remind me of the good parts of La La Land's music in a good way.
The theremin also is I feel like because that's maybe one of the last things you hear in this movie. I feel like it kind of goes out on that like reoccurring theme of the theremin. It just sounds fucking spooky, and it sounds kind of sci-fi-ish. But it also sounds mournful, like kind of like it's kind of like moaning or crying or kind of like a wail kind of. Yeah, it just sounds I don't know, it's a nice sound. I'm glad it was included in the score.
So maybe let's get into like the story a little bit. I mean, obviously it's about Neil Armstrong, and I was glad that they didn't go full biopic with this, Neil growing up in Texas or wherever, California, wherever he grows up. So I thought they picked like a nice place to start where he's doing sort of astronaut stuff. He's doing like the flight test pilot stuff, for somewhere in California. And then they established that he's got this daughter who's dying of leukemia. And then the feels come like really quickly because she dies like within like the first 5 minutes of the movie. I like the framing that they use with her sort of being this like motivator for him. And I'll come back
and
to
also this. Distraction. And also distraction. That's what they say at like the California like flight thing is they're like he made a mistake and somebody else is like,
he distracted?
And the guy's like, but he navigated like back and he came back fine or whatever. And then he's like, I don't know. I think he's just distracted or whatever.
I'll come back to this later, but I just want to mention now while we're talking about that, like it's a beautiful emotional scene at the time where he kind of goes into his study to cry for like a really long take during the funeral. But I think it's the wrong decision, and I'll come back to that later when we've kind of come full circle on this. And sort of going along with it, like I think the movie opted for like realism throughout, and it was kind of at the expense of making us feel how important this event was. Like I think a big example is like when Karen dies, and he's mourning, and then he immediately goes back to work to sort of just like, he's one of those guys that's like, I need to just bury my head in my job and not be at home where she was. And he ends up applying for the Gemini program, which is the program to like test out everything before they can be like, okay, then we'll go to Apollo and then we'll try to go to the moon. So he's going through like the whole Gemini interview process, and they have an interview where he's in the room with like all the big wigs from NASA, and they like ask him a bunch of like technical questions, and he nails it. And then one of them is like, what does the space program mean to you? Why do you think it's important? And they had this opportunity for him to give like some kind of like grandiose, inspiring answer that would have like sort of been speaking to us as the audience and be like, why should you care about NASA, about space travel, about us trying to go to the moon? And instead he gives this sort of, I think it's a problem with like the direction, the writing, and the acting on one. They're all on the same page, which is great. I just think they should have been on a different page, where like Ryan Gosling gives this like sort of like stuttering, stunted answer that like is sort of in theme, is talking about this grand idea of like, when you're up in space, you have this new perspective, and I think it's something that we should have done a long time ago. But he gives it in his like sort of like Ryan Gosling from Driver kind of performance, where he's just kind of like, yeah, and like, and it feels very real. And it like, I know that part of the problem is that Neil Armstrong, the person in real life, is very reserved and quiet. Yes. And they said he was the type of guy where like he wouldn't really speak a lot of the time, but when he did speak up, he had something good and important to say. But I think it ends up hurting the movie at times because like I didn't really care a whole lot about the importance of this mission.
Oh yeah.
In the context of this movie, even though outside of the movie, I know how important the moon landing was.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I think part of the problem is that like they didn't give a whole lot of stakes to this. On like a bigger scale. Like there was definitely stakes like the space missions are dangerous. They're showing us how many astronauts are dying and it's a difficult job, but they didn't explain like why does it matter? Like there was nothing about like, how important it was for us to beat the Russians at the time. Like it could have used just a lot of outside perspective on the Cold War and where we were at that time, you know, like from, it could have come probably more from like Janet and like, people in his like, everyday life who are like, we really need to beat the Russians or whatever I'm worried about, just sort of that tension going on the entire time. I didn't feel that at all from this movie. They barely talk about the Russians.
Right. Well, wait, Janet is Claire Foy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I don't know. They also have her do something else kind of where... I mean, they say Russians when they're in the room with Kyle Chandler.
Yeah, when he's first explaining the Gemini program,
right?
Where he's like, "They're gonna have to start from scratch, and we will too."
I'm so glad I finally like saw like that scene in context because in the trailer, it just has like a cut of him like underlining the word moon.
We're going to the moon. M-O-O-N.
Yes,
write that down.
Right. Which is such a dumb... I don't know. Whoever decided to cut that for the trailer is... I don't know. It's dumb. But they are at like kind of like a get-together or whatever. I think that the Armstrongs are hosting. And I don't know. I think everyone rushes to the TV and they turn it on and it's some sort of Russian space-themed accomplishment and someone's like, damn it! And like Claire Foy is like really? And I think she uses that energy to be like, you guys are just boys, using balsa wood, But to return to like...
You don't know anything. Just a bunch of boys.
But to return...
I'm not really on the Claire Foy train yet. I haven't seen The Queen or whatever it is, the Crown. On the other hand, I think I was so into her with the trailer and was like, man, like she fucking nails that look. And I think she says something in the trailer. Maybe she doesn't even. Maybe it's just the way she looks and the way that she holds herself where I'm like, I'm so fucking on board with this performance. And then in this movie, I still like her, but it's like, it's not as much. But to expand on what you were saying about Ryan Gosling's portrayal of Neil Armstrong, he definitely plays him as like this very stoic guy who doesn't say much. And like you said, like I guess that's very true to Neil Armstrong. And again, that's very true to that like entire generation of men. And I think like this movie kind of touches on like these weird forms of like masculinity and everything. But all of that doesn't really translate to movies either. That was like it's when I got home from this movie, I was talking to Rowan about what I thought about it, and I just had this feeling of like I feel like they did almost make the best movie possible about Neil Armstrong and the moon landing, right? But I just don't know if there should be a movie about Neil Armstrong and the moon landing because he's not, not that you don't want to root for him. He's likable, but he's just not entertaining in a movie because he's quiet. And even though I think they did a great job of trying to at least make us care about him because like, he's not this like explosive type of masculinity. He's the reserved, like, I can't talk about my feelings type of masculinity. Right. Like, I think my favorite scene in this movie is when after the funeral for the one astronaut, Elliot, that he got close with, and he is like, Janet, like, I want to leave. Can we leave now? And she wants to stay. And he takes the car and he drives back home and everyone's worried about him. So like the Jason Clarke character and his wife come back to help, and Jason Clarke comes out of the backyard, and Ryan Gosling's just staring up at the moon, with a telescope, and he just keeps trying to like say these things, and Ryan Gosling's like, "Do you think I came outside because I wanted to talk to somebody? Like, do you think I left the funeral because I wanted to talk to somebody?" I thought that was a great scene where like he doesn't explode. It's not like some big yelling dramatic scene,
right?
But it's like his way of being like, just leave me the fuck alone. Like I just want to be by myself. And I thought that was an inventive way to express that there's a character who doesn't want to express things.
Right.
Because that's a tough thing to get across in a script. A character who doesn't want to talk.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. Even, I think maybe having low expectations of this movie helps me enjoy it more than I thought I would, kind of. Because really, I mean, if we want to talk externally about this movie, it didn't have a good opening.
No.
It hasn't made a lot of money. And honestly, if it fell out of the Best Pictures, like out of the Best Picture noms, part of me kind of wouldn't be surprised, kind of, But
I think I would only be surprised because I'm like, what else would replace it at this point?
Yeah,
the herd seems very thin.
Oh, definitely. I don't know. Yeah,
it kind of depends on how they market it going forward. Like if they really push for it, I think they'll make it in. If they just decide to be like, it's not performing as well as we thought, let's not waste the resources to advertise it, then they might fall out. Like I feel like it's entirely on them. They've got the momentum from La La Land.
Right.
And just there's so much people attached to it that I think are respected in that way.
No, definitely. Yeah, I agree. And that is like...
And you've got the screenwriter for the former Best Picture winner, Spotlight, on this. Which is also another thing that's kind of disappointing to me because I feel like Spotlight is a screenplay that like takes a subject that is like at its heart not necessarily personal to the characters. Like it's sort of just like a good journalism story, like people doing good journalistic work, but that screenplay makes it feel personal and emotional to the journalists. Like not just us as the viewer being like touching little boys from the Catholic Church is wrong, but we feel for the journalists like working on it, and that's what I feel like this movie didn't do for me. With like again, like I feel like outside of it we can look at the moon landing and be like that was big and important, but I can't feel like why does it matter to Ryan Gosling or why does it matter to Jason Clarke or Buzz Aldrin or whatever. What are you laughing about?
I don't know. Just the way that came out, it just sounded. I was kind of listening to you, like anticipating you being like, God, like Spotlight was such a great screenplay, and then you said something about like touching little boys, and I was just kind of like. Were little boys touched by that movie? Like, not realizing, the content of that movie. Yeah.
Spotlight. God. Touching little boys.
Spotlight really got me,
Their target demographic of 9 to 12 years old.
It's just touching. It's a touching film.
I thought the astronaut training felt really short in this movie.
Yeah.
I don't know how I totally land on that. Because I get it. Because I think all they were actually trying to do is set up the fact that Neil, when he blacks out, sort of comes to quickly. Because he blacks out during that. And then he's like, oh, I'm fine. I can go again.
Right.
And that's important like during the Gemini mission. Because when everything starts spinning out of control, they both black out. But he comes back too quickly and is able to like abort the mission and pilot them back home.
Right.
I don't know that I like if they had gone longer, it would have started to feel like just like rehashing like Armageddon and like other like astronaut training movies. But it just kind of, it was weird to just be like, all right, here's this one motion simulator thing. And then there's no other training. Because there's like a montage and it does that. It goes them in class, like having to read like 600 pages a night. But then the montage transitions to like family life too.
Right. Yeah. This movie is strange in its pacing and the way it's cut. This movie, like, I mean, like, this is still the beginning, but this movie definitely gets like lost within itself in the middle of this movie. I don't think this needed to be 2 hours and 22 minutes or whatever it was. the second act is very shaggy. And it needs to be cut.
It's tough because it's like, again, like it's why I feel like it's almost a movie that didn't need to or shouldn't have been made.
Right.
Which I hate saying, because there are definitely parts of this that I enjoy, and I think it's very well made, and I think they did a really great job with the subject material. Mm-hmm. But there's parts of this where I feel like there's so much lacking. Like, I don't know these characters, even though I know the specifics of their situation. Like, we understand that Neil is very reserved, but I don't think they did a good job of painting him in contrast to other more talkative astronauts to be like, oh, he's the quiet one.
Right.
I don't know the characteristics of any of the astronauts except Buzz Aldrin. I think they did really good work with Buzz Aldrin, where
he's the interesting one.
Yeah, he's the one who, he'll say the blunt thing that's based on facts and not feelings. He's kind of like the Ben Shapiro of astronauts.
Right, yeah.
And like that makes me care about Buzz Aldrin more just because I know something about him. Whereas like Jason Clarke, Christopher Abbott, Pablo Schreiber, even the Elliot guy are all just kind of like cookie cutter astronauts where you could put any of them in that position, and I don't really care.
Yeah.
So like I feel like there could have been more spent on that, but it's such a long movie already, and then like you're sacrificing facts about the movie and facts about the moon landing in order to insert character development and stuff like that. So it's a tough movie to make. Like
it is.
I almost wish I think they've done a Apollo movie or TV series at one point. But I almost wish they would have just done like a gritty TV series for this. Like,
right. Yeah.
I'd watch a Damien Chazelle TV series and give him the full 8 to 10 episodes to explore these characters, because that's what I think this movie is missing. Like, I think it nails everything technically, and I get most of the facts about the mission. I feel like I learned something about the Apollo missions and the moon landing and what it was like, but I don't feel like I know these characters any better than before I watched the movie.
There's also so much of the missions as well, which I enjoy. But it's also like, I think this movie is at its best when it's with Neil's kind of family life. I think that's when it's the strongest. If you really, take into account, like, if you really break down this movie, like 40 minutes of this movie is violently shaking close-ups, and that's fucking painful. It's just like this, like, this movie is not fun. It's an experience, but it's not fun by design. Obviously, like it's not meant to be fun, but it's just still like it's fucking grating. And again, like I could maybe do without like half of that, like. Just even like close-ups of like dials while like the camera's like fucking shaking. I was just like,
those I found less interesting because like I don't think anybody was like, oh, like taking off is fun and not stressful. But there are times where it does really, really work. Like I think one of my favorite times is when they're walking across the like catwalk to like load into like the whatever, and they're looking up and like the lights are shaking and like the floor that they're walking on is shaking.
I'm just purely talking about in the spacecrafts.
But I think that style that they were going for of putting you in the shoes of the astronauts, it works elsewhere. And I shouldn't say, it does work in the capsule. Obviously, I feel like I'm in the capsule. I feel the stress of it, but it's a lot.
Because it is.
It's more useful elsewhere.
It creates like a great sense of claustrophobia. It's you're stuck in a fucking tin can and you're just kind of playing off of lights and noises, and you're using fucking math on a piece of paper to figure out where you are, and you're fucking turning like guitar volume knobs just to like get yourself out of a situation.
I really like the scene where I think the whole Gemini Agena docking sequence is really interesting because
that's great.
We know exactly how the moon landing ends, even if we don't know the exact specifics of how it goes before that. Like we know enough to be like, there's not a whole lot I feel like I learned about the moon landing mission exactly. But the Gemini like Agena docking sequence, like I don't know that they aren't going to crash land on Earth, or that I didn't know that something was going to go wrong either. So like everything about that was just inherently more exciting, I thought. And they did some things to like ratchet it up too. Like I thought, like, I don't know if this is accurate. I know from listening to the Director's Cut podcast, he was a slave to the details with a lot of this movie.
Right. It looks like it, yeah.
Like, even, we'll touch on it later, but like the scene where Neil goes to like the crater on the moon by himself, like, it's something that we don't know for sure, but it's based on like interviews that they did with a lot of people close to Neil about like, it's basically like a conjecture from people who knew Neil best about like, what did Neil do when he walked away from the spacecraft for that amount of time on the moon.
Really?
Yeah. So they don't know for sure. They knew he brought something from Karen up to the moon. They don't know what it was. They don't know if there was a bracelet because he was so reserved.
Right.
But he brought an object from Karen up to the moon and left it there, I think they said at some point. And they knew that he went away and walked by himself to the crater for a long time and then came back, but nobody knows what he did at the crater. So they're kind of conjecturing that, like, he probably left something for there.
I almost 100% assumed that was fiction.
Oh, yeah, I did too. And then listening to the podcast, he was like, we talked with Neil Armstrong's sister, and it was kind of like her hypothesis about like, we don't know what he did up there, but if I know Neil, that's probably what he did.
Jesus, what a fucking wet blanket. What a fucking...
Neil?
Yeah. Just like a fucking like, talk to somebody, Neil. Yeah. It's
well, that's
just,
why, like, I wish like, I think they did a good job of showing that sort of toxic masculinity in the sense that like masculinity is a cage type thing, like where he's being actively hurt by not wanting to talk about stuff and bottling things up. I just wish the movie maybe had more to say about it. Like, I think maybe if like they had shown, I mean, I think we can, again, there's not really spoilers in this movie, but I think if we could sort of jump around, like the movie is kind of framed by Karen dies in the beginning. He jumps like head first into his work and just buries himself in it. And all he cares about is like making sure this moon mission goes all right. And then he's on the moon. And it's kind of like this like release of like grief for him. And that's why at the beginning of the podcast, I had said, I wish they hadn't had that scene of him crying at the funeral, because then it would be so much more impactful when he cries on the moon at the crater. Because then it would be like he hadn't allowed himself to grieve. He had just jumped into his work and he had devoted himself to it. And now that like the mission's done, all he's left with is like this grief that he hasn't really dealt with.
Right.
And it might come out there. And then I think like another thing they could have done is like maybe shown, I mean, they showed a decent amount of strain in the relationship with Janet, but maybe have shown like less intimacy, I guess. Like just make them feel really distant, so that when he's sort of gone through with this whole moon mission and been able to expel this grief that's been inside of him, that's been kind of keeping them apart, then I think that scene where they're like touching on the glass when he's in the contamination, that feels a lot more impactful because
when they're ETing.
When they're ETing. Because then it would be like, like now that I've sort of exercised this demon that I had inside of me and it's gone, like now I'm realizing that like, we haven't really touched in a while and now we can't touch. And it would feel a lot more meaningful.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah.
And I think they come really close to those themes. Like I think they show us him burying himself in the work, but they don't tell us a lot. And I know that sounds counterintuitive because you're supposed to show, not tell, but I feel like they kind of just they put the evidence out there, and I feel like the movie doesn't really come away with a message about that. Like, what does it tell us about Neil that he is reserved in that way, and what does it tell us, that he, grieved on the moon in that way or whatnot?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and even him burying himself in his work he just seemed like a very studious person
to begin with.
Right. Like he had his own separate notebook about
the leukemia.
Right. Yeah. This movie does I mean, it's not the very end, but this movie does kind of bring it home at the end, even though the middle is just so weighed down by like so much stuff. Just him, the bracelet is such a strong scene. That seems to be the scene where people are like, okay, like this film was like worth me seeing, kind of. If you go out on like a good note, even the scene with him and Claire Foy at the end is
those
really
are two
great.
scenes where there's a little bit of conjecture there, and I think that's what the movie needed
right
throughout.
But even the scene that was like most heartbreaking for me was, again, it was a little. I was kind of like, am I on board with this scene where like Claire Foy is just like, you need to like tell those boys you might not be coming back, kind of.
Bunch of boys.
And I was just like, kind of like, all right, where are we going with this scene? And then they sit at the dinner table and he doesn't really even say anything. Like, he says, like, at the most probably what he would say, but it's still not satisfying. And I'm surprised she's satisfied. But then, like, the younger son, like, doesn't understand. But then the other son, who, like, shakes his hand. Like, that scene is, like, probably the most heartbreaking in this. He's just, like, that, like, really, like, broke my heart. Like,
really?
More than the bracelet or the daughter, the dead daughter arc.
See, there's
something weird about it.
It was another scene where I thought, like, I think this movie...
Because I think that
it needed to ratchet up the drama rather... Because I think that's a very realistic scene. I think it's Ryan Gosling doing his driver character again, where he's just kind of, like, looking and being like, I don't know what to say here. Like, you know, like, I can just imagine, like, remember there was that Vine or the YouTube video of, like, the guy who was trying to feed Ryan Gosling cereal in different movies. Like, this would be a great addition to that clip.
Right.
But yeah, like it's like, yet she makes this whole big deal, you know, rightfully so, about like, you know, I'm not going to be the one to tell them that you're not coming home now. Like, if this is something that you need to do, then you need to tell them. It's not my turn to do that anymore. And it's like we get it. Like, he's so reserved at this point that it's hurting his relationship with his wife. But we can even see it from his side of, like, you know, he said goodbye to his daughter once. He doesn't want to say goodbye to these kids again. You know, even if he's, you know, so devoted to the work, he doesn't even want to face the possibility of, like, I might not be coming back.
Right.
But I felt like that scene was too quiet. It was too
definitely
slow, and I could have used, like, one of the kids crying and maybe the whole family breaks down and they hug or something like that. Like, there's stuff where, like, again, that's why I come back to maybe this movie didn't need to be a movie. You know, like, there's stuff that makes us, you know, like these cliche things that you can do, but they still sort of draw us in to the movie and make us care a little bit more.
There's something, and again, I don't think I fully stood at the time where I was like tearing up with that handshake, but I think there is something, like, at its core that is very pure, kind of. And I think it also has something to do with what's missing from this movie, kind of. And it's the exploration of some version of masculinity that was happening with this generation, where, like, this son of the next generation, who's a little more, like, in contact with his feelings and is still, like, being raised by, like, a mom and, like, a dad who's not, like, totally there. It's just this kind of, like, well, dad's not going to show his emotions, so I'm going to give him a good old man-to-man handshake, even though I'm a fucking, like, 7-year-old. Like, good luck, dad. This might be the last time I see you. And he's, like, too afraid to, like, hug him because he's that, like, stoic and he's that manly, kind of, that the son feels like he has to be, like...
And, like, I think that's very real.
Right.
I think they could have played it way more sentimentally.
It's me projecting my own, like,
well, no, I think you might be. I mean, I think that might have been their intention too with that scene. I wonder if that was the right choice. And again, based on what he said about the rest of the movie, I have to imagine that a lot of these decisions he's making are based on what, you know, members of the Armstrong family told him about some of these interactions. And I think he felt, because this is the first time he's made a movie that's not based on some completely fictional script, that he was sort of a slave to these details. And I don't think he took a lot of liberties with this movie.
There's also something where you can, like, color this character just, like, a little more with just, like, every situation he's in seems to be, like, a situation that he's just, I don't know. It's sometimes they don't pick a side of, like, how they want him to be. And then, like, also I think as somebody who writes the script and wants to give him, like, more personality, even though he's devoid of personality, kind of, like, put him in more situations where you're, like, laughing at, like, how familiar you are with this character. Kind of like, if you could bring one thing to the moon, what would you bring? And he's like, I would bring more fuel. It's just, like, so like ridiculous that you, like, laugh at it, kind of.
Because I did like that part, and I'm assuming that's pulled from the actual press conference. So you would think that there would be, you know, other examples where they could have had Especially, like, I feel like he should have been around Buzz Aldrin
most
more.
Definitely, yeah.
Again, I feel like they're a slave to the details, and he probably didn't know him that well until the mission. But, like, they play so well off of each other, and that's why that news conference works really well, is because Buzz Aldrin, has this, like, real sentimental answer of, not sentimental, but more emotional and more personality to it. I'll bring my wife's jewelry up there. Like, what wife wouldn't want that kind of bragging?
You know how the ladies are, am I? Just like something the press can write, like, detail about, like a kind of tabloidy thing, where
like they have like him around, like the Pablo Schreiber character. Like, as much as I love Pablo, like, I could eliminate him from this movie.
Right.
Like, and again, like, that's why I feel like maybe this wasn't the right movie for Damien Chazelle to make for his first, like, biopic, first historical movie, because I feel like this is a movie where you need to play a little bit looser with the details to make it work. The real story, despite, like, how fun it is to read about in history, I don't think it works in a 2-hour fictional or nonfiction movie.
Right. Yeah. One thing I do think this film gets right is just kind of pushing or new boundaries or whatever. I don't think we've ever seen like a nonfiction space exploration film as a horror film. Like any other time we see like a historical space movie, they're usually super like aspirational or just filled with like American wish fulfillment kind of.
You have like all the people watching the TV screen with like their fingers crossed.
Right.
Come on, Neil. Come on.
Right. Or it's even just like it's always like, astronauts are national heroes. It's just like, it's not this movie, which is kind of more like, astronauts can be like a little fucking like egotistical and selfish and like just completely willingly like ready to abandon their wives and children to go on these fucking suicide missions of glory. Like, it's just kind of like like the woman like standing over her, like the wife standing over her trunk, just very like creepily, like that one scene, or just seeing like these people in.
I didn't like that scene in particular.
Right, but these scenes of grief where it's just kind of like, oh wow, like that seems very brave and bold what you're doing, but you actually fucking destroyed everyone who knows you because you decided to partake in this kind of
Well, to that point, I think that points to, like, I feel like they needed to really drive home why this mission mattered.
No, exactly.
Because like in the context of this film, without that like otherworld or sort of meta outside the plot of this movie context of like, there's like the Red Scare and there's the Cold War and there's all this stuff going on, and like it mattered to us to beat Russia because they were beating us at every other level. Like, they say that, but they don't really make us feel it, and I feel like it could have come more from the wives.
Right.
I'm sort of losing my train of thought.
The wife standing over the trunk. Did you have something to say about that, or just?
Well, I guess. I was thinking about how, like, that guy dying in this movie, because we don't feel the greater importance, we end up sort of siding with the wife. Like, there's the one point where Claire Foy is arguing with Ryan Gosling about like Elliot's family, like they don't have a father, they don't have a husband, kind of trying to impress, like, you could die, and like, does it really matter? And because in the confines of this movie, we don't really feel that big importance of it, like we kind of side with her of like, yeah, it probably doesn't matter. Like, they are just a bunch of boys doing this whole like ragtag space mission, just to do whatever. Like, they're not even doing like real science up there, as far as we can tell. Like, they're just landing on the moon for the sake of landing on the moon.
It's also, this film is not procedural at all. Like, it's fine kind of when they like whiz past like all the alarms going off, and I'm sure he's a slave to the details with like, okay, one off at every like second or whatever. But they never really totally like, I would have loved to like understand like half of it, like kind of where it's just
they don't try to put anything in layman's terms. So there's a lot of like alarms going off, and even because they're so realistic, like it's hard to hear what the actors are saying inside the capsule at times. You know, like everything's shaking, and they're like, "Oh, this is going off."
Right? It's like, oh, it's fucking code 1990. It's just kind of like, okay,
sounds bad.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and mission control's like, it's fine. It's kind of like, well, it's fine then.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I do know that he said that he watched a lot of like every great like space movie that he could find, and then tried to steer away from everything that they had done.
I'm trying to
so
think
that they wouldn't be like beholden to it.
Yeah.
And then they said they watched a lot of movies that had nothing to do with space and tried to lean into good things that they liked about those movies. Like they were saying they were watching a bunch of war movies and like trying to replicate parts of that in the context of NASA.
This movie is kind of like, again, unlike a lot of space movies, this movie is kind of like this like slow death march of just there are, I don't think in any other movie you see kind of like the lives that are like sacrificed at the altar of putting a man on the moon or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I did
like that. I think why I didn't like the like Janet scene, something about it reminded me of the movie We Were Soldiers, because like I think it's because it makes the whole like Janet Armstrong and all the other wives feel like sort of like a B story to Neil Armstrong, rather than feeling like truly connected, where it's like, while you're up there doing your space stuff, I got to deal with Elliot's wife or whatever. Because there's like a scene in like We Were Soldiers where like all the wives like keep getting together every time like someone dies, and they like bake cookies and like bring it over. And
I know. I was waiting for this to turn into like an episode of like Astronaut Wives or whatever. Yeah.
And like I felt like that wasn't really necessary. Like I feel like there was other ways we could have shown that people were dying, and it was fine to do it just through the astronauts, because those are the people that are really knowing these people best. If we don't have the time to go into all of their families and kids, and like you have to sort of be a little bit more economical with what you're going to show in this movie. So I thought that was sort of wasted, but I did like that they were impressing upon us that like all these people keep dying all the time. Like they would let us get to know like Elliot, and then he would just be gone. They would let us get to know like Jason Clarke and the I forget the actor's name. He was in Boardwalk Empire, and the older guy, the older astronaut who's in the middle of the Plugs Out mission that burns up.
Right.
And he dies. And we just keep seeing all these astronauts die, and you're kind of just like, well, what the fuck? Like,
right, yeah.
It's just supposed to be this sort of like PR mission to like beat Russia, and like actual people are dying. And it kind of makes you buy into like they have the one scene with like Whitey's on the Moon, the Gil Scott-Heron spoken word track.
That kind of also felt like a weird, like I want to be on the side of like, oh, like I don't know, that just seems like such like an like every other space movie move is to be more about like the Russia thing, or like this feels like a commercial break of like Whitey's on the Moon or whatever. And or even like the weird like footage they have of like Kurt Vonnegut kind of, which is cool clip. I've never seen that. Like as like somebody who, that's crazy. Like as somebody who's like one of like the most beloved like sci-fi authors of all time, to be like, we got fucking problems down here. There's no reason to go into space, kind of. But still, it felt like a commercial break from like this very close up, intensive look at Neil Armstrong's life, where it's just kind of like, we didn't have any third party for the first 2 hours. Why are we introducing this now?
Yeah, it was something that, I did enjoy.
Right.
Because we've never, all the other astronaut movies are just like, American heroes doing what America needed.
Right.
But we didn't really get the aspect of like, we're spending a lot of money on this. There are other things we could be spending it on, when it really is just a PR mission, to beat Russia.
And that's why I don't like the I don't know, the scene at the White House is kind of, it's just kind of like, well, we need to convince these politicians why, like that was just a scene for somewhere for them to be when like the plugs out mission failed, kind of. It really had nothing to do with kind of like nothing was on the line. Nothing was really on the line of just like, are we gonna get funding to fucking go to the moon or whatever? Like, why are we sucking up to these people?
No,
like,
it wasn't important in that way, but I did think it was a little bit of color where like the one senator that they're talking to, they were talking. I forget exactly what they're saying. They're being like, oh yeah, like we're doing like a plugs out test or whatever, for the lunar capsule or whatever exactly it is, and the senator is sort of like retorting with like, well, I don't really care about that, like I care about like, you know, the cost and like the dollars and cents of it all and whatnot, and sort of giving us that perspective of which we don't really often get, where it's like, you know, like NASA may believe they're doing important things, but there is a dollars and cents cost to everything that they're doing, and we're spending an insane amount of money on this, and is it worth the American taxpayers' dollars at that point? Right. But it was, I feel like they were caught in between, where like they showed enough of it that we were aware of it, but that also is like a double-edged sword, where we're kind of like, well, I feel like I need more of that, because it's like just this little like splotch of color they keep throwing in there. Right, like a senator says something, we show the Whitey on the Moon song and sort of the protests going on, and like the Kurt Vonnegut clip, and like I feel like if you're going to do that, then you need to do that more evenly throughout the movie, and like really ramp up the pressure of like, you guys think you are doing the right thing, but like the public's not really on your side, and you really have to prove yourselves by making it to the moon. Yeah, because if astronauts just keep dying and they're spending all this money, then like, I mean, I think we all would end up siding with the public at that point. Oh, most definitely. We like to think, because like, you know, all these like Apollo 13 and whatever movies that have come out that, you know, are really inspiring and whatnot. But I feel like if that was going on right now, and like Donald Trump was like, we need to make it to Mars, and we're going to keep sacrificing all these astronaut lives, we as the public now would be like, yeah, fuck that. Like, we got people that are starving to death down here in Newark. And no. And I don't know. It was a good idea. Because again, we haven't seen that in a space movie before. It's just kind of like, even something that was like a fucking Best Picture nominee that had like African-American main characters, like Hidden Figures, that never comes up, kind of. It like, those characters are never like, wait, why are we putting all this like government money into this space mission when like everyone that I know is fucking starving to death, and like all this stuff. But well, he did say in the Director's Cut podcast that like he decided to put that scene in because they were looking at like archival footage from the time period, and then they started looking for stuff to sort of express the opposition, and they found the Gil Scott Heron track, and they're like, well, we kind of got to put this in there. I think they mix that with like there's like bongos or something going on underneath. I don't think that's on the original. I think that those are new stuff that's been added underneath. And they make it seem like it's part of the whole protest thing. But it seemed like something where, had they maybe not come across that track, I don't know if they would have even really inserted a whole lot about the protests. Well, I think they were like, well, this is a convenient way without, you know, sort of taking up too much space in the movie to get that across. And if we can do it this economically, then we might as well. Right. But it ends up hurting them, I think, in the end. Because you're like, well, I think I need more of that.
Well, yeah, no, because it's kind of like...
The characters never talk about it. Like, you never hear Neil Armstrong be like, you know, is it really worth the tax dollars we're spending?
Because it's kind of like, if we spend 2 hours, like, on a close-up of Ryan Gosling's face in a spacecraft, and then, like, a 2-minute commercial break of, like, oh my God, like, why are we spending all this? And then just, like, go back to Ryan Gosling, like...
That's why I feel like it's, you know, this could have been a great TV show, because you could do a whole episode where that theme of that episode is like, you know, it could be one of the episodes where Elliot dies or Jason Clarke's character dies, and you're like, you know, is it worth lives, and is it also worth like dollars and whatnot? I don't know. Right. Yeah. Could have been a great TV series. Still a great movie. But throwing stones at it. Let's see. I don't have a whole lot to say about the moon landing sequence. It's kind of a blur to me. I mean, I saw this movie a while ago. I remember being very impressed at the time, but it's just also so... I don't want to say paint by numbers, because I think that's underselling it. It's a great sequence, but there's such little talking. It's just a lot of kind of like, and this happens, and then this happens, and it's really built up by this impressive score. It's visually impressive. But I think because we know how it's going to end and we know a lot of the specifics, there's not a whole lot that we're like learning for the first time, other than like, I think the only thing I sort of felt was impressed upon me by this movie is that like they had to sort of take it into like manual, towards the end when he's like, oh, like there's boulders there and they have to land it.
Right.
Like they do some things to express like, oh, like it wasn't like just this whatever mission. It was very risky. Right. And there was a lot of times at which it could have failed.
Right.
And I think maybe like the thing about like the fuel, like there's a point where like they could have turned back and aborted the mission and they didn't because Neil Armstrong was so driven. So some of that stuff is nice, but it's just not in the end all that memorable. I feel like being on the moon itself is actually more memorable in this movie because there's this emotion to it on a character driven level that like I can attribute well, that's the scene where Neil throws Karen's bracelet in like the crater and whatnot. The rest of it just kind of feels like a recreation of the moon landing footage.
Right. And it was cool when they cut out the audio or whatever, but it felt like it was a really long time, kind of. And also, they are really gratuitous with like a lot of these shots, kind of, where they'll just kind of like keep it on Neil Armstrong for a while, even when he has that like reflective visor down, and it's just kind of like you just kind of have to like interpret his body language, where he's like like staring into fucking space, because like when you do like 5 minutes of that. And then, like, I laughed out loud, like, after that, and then you just see, like, his body kind of go like this, like... And then all of a sudden you see, what's it called? Buzz, like, doing, like, the hops, like, across the moon. I, like, audibly laughed out loud, because it was just such a break from, like, Ryan Gosling staring in the direction of the camera with a reflective visor on. Like, it was just, like... Again, they were all on the same page. I just wish it was, like Damien like should have been like and like just stand there and do like really nothing, kind of. And like we won't even get to see your face, like it'll just be a reflective visor, and then it's just again like, and then it just cuts to like Buzz Aldrin. He's like like fucking tearing across the moon, like it was just some of it was just like weird to me.
I do like the sort of like the movie does it a lot, especially with the soundtrack. One of the reasons why I'm so fond of the soundtrack is it does a lot with like tension and release, where like there's so much tension during like the landing. Are they going to stick the landing? And then they land and they're on the moon and it's like so quiet and like tranquil, and like I don't even know if we have like an actual melody going on at that point. I think it's just a lot of like pads and textures and stuff. With like a little bit of melody probably on like the theremin or something. I'd have to go back and look at the soundtrack. But I remember it being like much quieter and calmer and just really impressing upon you like without words, which is again why I'm so impressed with the soundtrack. Like, what is it like to land on a place that no one's ever been before? Right. That's untouched. And like they show him like putting his footprint down and lifting it up. And it's kind of like, well, that's just going to be there forever because it's just so still and quiet here, and like looking around and like you half expected to like you can almost like put yourself in Neil Armstrong's shoes, being like, there should be like an alien or something over there.
Right.
Like, I just seems so quiet and lonely. And
there were so many scenes where they're in like a space shuttle or something, and there's just like such nothingness out the window that was waiting for like a jump scare or something, or just or like when they do go on the moon, it does like a really great job of just being so otherworldly. But when the volume cuts out, I mean, it was like a nice thought. I think it just goes on for too long. Like all you can kind of hear is just breathing of like the audience. And I mean, again, because like,
well, in my audience, I heard some guy explaining that when he puts like his foot down and makes the footprint, he's like, oh, there's no wind on the moon. That's going to be there forever.
but this is
he went into like I'm paraphrasing. It was a whole speech to whoever he was with about why the footprint would be there forever.
I can't stand that in movie theaters. But yeah, it's a nice kind of idea though, to kind of, if you've been violently shaken for the past 2 hours and then all of a sudden you land on the moon, and it's such stillness, and it's so silent, and it's not fucking like somebody fucking like ringing a tin can in your ear for fucking 2 hours. It's like a really nice change of pace, and it's so different. I
have to say, I really liked, like, I think there's a few things with this movie where, like, even if I'm not like totally gung-ho on this for like best picture, there's a lot of awards that I am gung-ho on this, but this is such a great technically made movie. I think I think it's my top contender for soundtrack or score rather right now. I think as of right now it might also be my top contender for production design, just because I think they accomplish so much just in the scope of the movie, but then I think they had a really great just head on their shoulders in terms of, like, they really could have easily just gone for like sleek and like crisp and clean and like, oh, it's this brand new shuttle that we got from NASA, but they went for almost like a ragtag look, where, like, especially when they're like, they do a lot of shots, like most of the stuff is interior to the shuttle when they're or the rover or whatever. I don't think we're not in the shuttle program of NASA yet, but the ship when they're in space, like launching and whatnot, a lot of it is on the interior, but occasionally they'll go on the outside and you'll see like what the outside is made of, and like just like little like sheets of metal will be like shaking, and you're like, oh my god, like this, everything is just kind of like makeshift and thrown together, and like it could all just kind of like come apart at any moment, like especially like the landing rover, there's a lot of stuff on it. Like there's the one shot where the doors kind of like go back, and we sort of, they explain like how we have the footage of them landing on the moon. It's because there's the camera that's on the one door that pulls back, but there's just this kind of like almost like aluminum foil material that's like surrounding it, and you're like, oh god, like it almost sort of ties back to like Claire Foy being like, you're just a bunch of boys. Like it's just like people just building whatever it takes to like make this work, and they weren't experts at it. Like it could have so easily failed. It's just showing us like the flimsiness of the materials. That's why I really like the scene on the catwalk, where like the catwalk's shaking and you're seeing like the light shaking. Like it's not this tight, nailed down production. It's really showing us like it was a like threadbare kind of experience, and it could have easily failed at any step along the way.
It reminds me of like one of the, or something reminding me of this, but just I think like one of the first scenes I would cut from this movie is everything to do with just like literally Ryan Gosling by himself. They never really show anybody on the ground or whatever, just testing out like the lunar like vehicle, and then he like ejects at the last minute and it fucking goes up in a fireball, and it's like a cool scene, but it looks like it belongs in Mission Impossible or something. And then it's also like he goes into the NASA facility, and he goes home, and like he's got blood pouring down his face. Like it just seems so extreme. And like and even if that really did happen, it was so out of the tone of what the rest of the movie was like, where death was kind of more of a I don't know. It was weird to me to see.
I kind of liked it because I think it put like the first half of the movie, he's so quiet and everything is just so like, all right, we're just doing whatever, we're just doing our job, we're doing this difficult job. And I thought it sort of ramped up the circumstances and the stakes as we're getting like, it's the last thing that we really see before like the actual moon landing sequence, Apollo 11.
I liked
so I thought I liked him also like going home, just grabbing a drink and walking out, like even though he's got blood pouring down his face, not explaining to his wife what happened. Like it showed us how poured into, and like, you know, how much he really was just burying himself in his work, which is something that I almost wanted more of in this movie. So I do appreciate the scenes where it happens.
But again, I think it's more of one of those things, just like the Gil Scott Heron scene, where it's kind of like, I don't think this fits with the kind of, like, I would have liked more of it, but like it seems like it's.
Well, I think it works there because I think it works there because I think it probably literally did happen. I think they're pulling from like, not to like, you know, boil it down to like the Wikipedia article, but if you probably read the Neil Armstrong Wikipedia article about the Apollo missions, there's probably, you know, one section that's like, and he almost died while testing out the whatever rover thing, because he ejected and it blew up and whatnot. So they probably felt like they had to include it because of that. And I think just like, I don't know that I want more of it because I think it helps the natural arc of this movie where like, we do start with the stakes sort of pretty high in terms of his daughter's dying. He's diving into his work. And then we have like Elliot dies and then like 3 astronauts die. And then it's like this sort of like ragtag thing where like he almost dies. And I think the fact that they have him like not ever even like taking a chance to like shower and clean himself up, like he's just like that dove into his work. Like I think that helps us be like, okay, we're getting to the climax of this movie. So I think I agree with putting that in there, and I don't know that I needed more because then it would feel uneven. It would be these sort of like dips and valleys rather than a gradual incline up to the climax of the movie.
Yeah, I just also don't know if I'm remembering it more incorrectly, but like it looks like it almost mirrors the scene of like in the very beginning when he's trying to kind of break the atmosphere in like California, and then when he kind of like like when he like lands or whatever, it looks like he's landing in like the same place almost, and that just looks like so much more realistic because he's like that was kind of he was like burning up from the like fucking going through our atmosphere or whatever, and like with this he ejects and it blows up on fire, and then he kind of gets dragged from his parachute and gets out of his parachute and just kind of like walks away. And there's like nobody else there. It's just like such a weird scene. And I don't know. It felt like an action movie. Like it just, to me, it felt out of place.
Yeah, and I think they're because in the,
but it's great.
He lands in like the desert with like like cracked like mud type ground in the first scene. In this scene, he's in like a field, somewhere.
Yeah, that is true. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I have.
Yeah, let's get some ratings.
All right.
Let me pull this up. On review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 88% based on 342 reviews with an average rating of 8.1 out of 10. The website's critical consensus reads, First Man uses a personal focus to fuel a look back at the pivotal moment in human history and takes audiences on a soaring dramatic journey along the way.
What do you know?
Oh boy.
Yeah, I don't totally know where I stand with this movie.
I know my feelings about the movie that I want to express. I just don't know numerically where I want to land.
Oh, same. I almost have nothing left to say.
Let me go first.
Okay.
I don't want my score to be tainted by what your opinion is. Let me be my own man.
First man.
The first man
to review on this podcast.
First man. I think Chazelle, Damien gets really close to greatness here. Like I think he nails all the technicals of this movie. I think the visuals are fantastic, the aesthetics, the production design. Like I've said, obviously the cinematography and the score. I think he puts together this great team of people, and I think they're all on the same page for the entirety of this movie. It feels singular and well put together. And I think the performances themselves are great. Even though I'm not entirely on team Claire Foy, I'm just like, I'm not really buying into the hype. I think she's fine in this movie. I think I can't really throw any stones at her performance. And obviously I'm team Gosling. I think he does a good job in this. I just wish they had all been on a different page. But I think in the end, if you look at the script and you look at some of the directorial choices, it fails in some aspects. Like I think, like I said, if I look at the script that Singer, Josh wrote for Spotlight, it made journalism and this great journalistic story feel personal and emotional, and I feel like this failed to make the space program and astronauts feel personal and emotional in a way that really worked for us. And which is like disappointing because it is this like I feel like I can look at the space program outside of this movie and just so clearly see like the science and the heroism of it and be like, yeah, like I feel like my opinion of Neil Armstrong outside of this movie is higher than my opinion of Neil Armstrong in this movie. And that's kind of disappointing. And I think that has everything to do with him opting for realism, rather than like playing up some of the more cinematic aspects of this movie or the more emotional aspects. And then I think my opinion of this movie was a little bit hurt after listening to like the director's cut episode.
Right.
Because he sort of explains like the logistics of how they got into this movie, and it makes it seem more like this movie was maybe like an afterthought to La La Land. Like La La Land was clearly his passion project. You know, he was working with like a lot of his friends, and he got all these great people on board, and you know, they had this fantastic run at the Oscars. You know, came so close to winning Best Picture. He did win Best Director. And then they sort of, this was something they had on the back burner for a while, and they made it right after La La Land merely because they knew that Ryan Gosling was who they wanted for the part, and he would be free once the La La Land like sort of awards circuit was done, so they could just sort of jump right into this. So it doesn't make me feel like this was something he was totally passionate about, even though, you know, he is someone who can probably make the shit out of anything because he's just such a great technical film director. But I didn't really feel the emotion that I felt with Whiplash or La La Land. Even, you know, even as much as like I'm not a huge fan of La La Land, the emotion's fucking there in La La Land. Like if you think of like that last really like sequence in La La Land, like as much as I want to hate that movie, I love that sequence at the end of it. So I think when I take all of that into account, it seems like maybe he was a little burnt out from La La Land after like the press circuit and all that. And he just, on the episode, he just doesn't sound like totally into it. Like he's not really selling this movie as something that like we should care about, or that he even cares about. Like he's kind of cracking a lot of jokes and being sarcastic about everything, and just doesn't really sound like he really cares whether people like First Man or not. Whereas like I remember, you know, him talking about La La Land, it was this like he sounded more invested in people caring about musicals again, that he was invested in like people caring about Neil Armstrong, which is kind of sad. I think despite all of that, this movie is so technically strong, and there definitely are moments that I am feeling with Neil Armstrong, even if it isn't as picture perfect emotionally as I wanted to be. I think I'm going to land on a 4. It's definitely one of the better movies I've seen this year. I think when I came home, when I was talking to Rowan and kind of just digesting how I felt about this, I had said, like, it's sad that I think I was more touched by, like, Avengers Infinity War than I was by this movie. And I gave Avengers Infinity War a 4, I think. So I don't think I can go higher than that for this. Which is fine. I don't think it warrants going higher than that. But I would feel... I could go with a 3.5 or a 4. I think I'm going to err on the side of 4 just because after listening to the soundtrack again this week... and just thinking back on some of the shots and some of the emotional moments that do stick, you know, like the last scene of like them touching through the glass, or, you know, him looking on the moon, and sort of the way they were able to express someone who doesn't really express things often, I think was pretty great. So I'm going to go with 4. There's definitely some complaints, but among the best movies I saw this year, we'll still be looking forward to whatever Damien Chazelle decides to do next.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I don't have too much to say. I had something to say reacting to something you said, but now I completely forget it. But I definitely came out of the movie theater kind of admiring it more than I actually liked it. I was just kind of like, they set out to make the movie they made. I don't completely agree with, you know, everything that happened there. You know, like I said, I think the middle sags significantly. Again, it is kind of this Death March morose kind of film. I heard they filmed, I guess maybe the moon scene without green screen. It was like with like LED lights, or that were kind of like showing what, like, that's how they got like the reflection in his eyes and on his visor and everything, which I thought was interesting. And it was kind of like they could actually like react to things that were actually kind of looked like they were there. Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I don't really know how to react to the film. Has something gone wrong?
I'm just very there's something has gone wrong. I just don't know what. The time here just keeps going from like 55 minutes, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, and then back to 1 second, 2 seconds. So
is that for the GoPro or whatever? Or?
Yeah, it might be erasing the beginning of the episode. So let's wrap it up.
Okay. Yeah. So I was between 3.5 and 4. I think I'm gonna go with 4. I think 4 is the highest score I've given this year. We were just talking about how similar our scores have been this season, and B, how just not great movies have been released this year. And this was definitely the leader of the pack so far, but also I can't say that I'm in love with this movie. Yeah. I think this movie's very good. I don't know. Yeah, I would even be hesitant to recommend it to people. But yeah, I'm going to land on 4 fingers.
So that obviously will come to 4 fingers. Let's see. We did have 2 comments on the Facebook group, which again, you can join at How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up? Just search that on Facebook for the Facebook group. We talk movies on there. We share memes. And obviously, as you're about to hear now, you have a chance to be on the podcast if you want to share your opinion on movies that we're reviewing. Let's see. We already recited Ross's request for First Man to the tune of God's Plan. And then Nick Alcello said, can't believe he won the Tour de France.
Man, this was, I saw a headline or even just an article that said Chazelle to tackle Armstrong next. And I was like, oh, Lance Armstrong. And I got very excited because I read like all the Lance Armstrong books, and in the public eye of controversy and everything, and I thought that was so the whole doping thing, and I don't know, that would, again,
it's a little more emotionally charged.
It would have made a much better movie than I think this would.
Yeah, there's some like inherent drama to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all we
Wishful
got from
thinking.
The Facebook group. And obviously our 2 scores of 4 will come out to 4. Don't have to do any math there. Let's see. Joe's going to cover anything really pressing in the intro, and you can go to howmanyfingerspodcast.com for any of our links. But most importantly, if all goes well, our first episode of the new series under the How Many Fingers banner, Goldfingers, should be out.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, if all goes according to plan. I haven't made it yet.
Right, yeah.
I've got 2 days left to make it, but we'll see. But you can find that exclusively on our YouTube. So go to youtube.com and just search for How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up? Or go to our website, howmanyfingerspodcast.com, and you'll find a direct link to our YouTube there. And make sure you're subscribed so you won't miss any future episodes. And if you haven't listened to the intros, if you've been skipping over the intros, Goldfingers is our new series, which is going to be a data-driven Oscar prediction video series on our YouTube. So I'm going to be taking you week by week and beat by beat through the Oscar award season, and sort of using data from precursor awards and news and trends and my own intuition at times to just explain what I think is going to be nominated and ultimately what will win at the Academy Awards this year. Right. So I think it's going to be a good time. Definitely check it out. We'll see how the first episode does. Lord willing, if it's done in time. So subscribe to our YouTube to check that out. Check out our review of Mandy last week with Nick Alcello, and check out a review of Bohemian Rhapsody the week before that with us.
Yeah,
just us.
Just us.
You guys still like us, right? All right, that's about it. Let's see what the fuck is going on with this GoPro. We'll see you guys next week for I don't know what.
We'll see.
We'll find out together. Goodbye.
Later.